Hey everyone, it's Mr. Han here. Here are our notes on solving equations with fractions. So today we're going to be talking about what solving an equation, but there's going to be a fraction involved. I know all of you love fractions, but just kidding, I know you don't. But we're going to go ahead and try to solve an equation when there's a fraction involved. So the goal here is to solve an equation to get x by itself. So technically, let's go ahead and write that. Our goal is still to get x by itself. Oops, let's see. Get x by itself. That's still the goal. But in order to do that with a coefficient, right? Coefficient is the number in front of a letter. If there's a coefficient in that's a fraction, right? What we can do is we can multiply the whole equation by the common denominator on both sides to get rid of any denominators and fractions. So sometimes you might want to get a common denominator first. Let's look here. Common denominator is what they have in common, what they are the same. Okay, and denominator is the number at the bottom of a fraction. So go ahead and highlight common denominator. Okay. And we're looking at the denominator, which is the number at the bottom of the fraction. Here's the denominator. Okay. So our job here is to find a common denominator. Well, look at the whole entire equation, right? Are there any other denominators, right? Like 2/5 is a fraction here. This is our fraction. Are there any other fractions? Are there any other fractions? No. So the denominator here is 5, and so the common denominator is 5. So we're just going to write down right here, common denominator equals 5. There is no other denominator. So that's the common one. That's the one they all have the same. And so we're going to multiply the whole equation, the whole entire thing, by 5. Another way we could talk about that is multiply both sides, or the whole thing, right, by 5. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply both sides by 5, or another way of saying that is the whole thing, the whole equation. And so when we do that, we're going to get rid of our denominator. We're going to get rid of our fraction. So here, check it out. This is distributing the 5. So I'm going to go ahead and, I can do that. Go ahead and distribute the 5 into both terms here. So here, this is the whole concept of distributing, right? And so I'm going to multiply by each group. This is saying 5 groups of 2/5 x and 5 groups of -19. So if I go ahead and do that, 5 groups of 2/5 x minus 5 groups of -19, or minus 5 groups of 19 equals 5 groups of 11, or 5 times 11. So we're going to go ahead and distribute that over there too. Okay? All right. So 5 over 1 times 2 over 5. If you forget multiplying fractions, we're going to multiply the top across. We're going to get 10 over 5x. I'll go ahead and move this over here so you can see that. And so we have 10 over 5x minus 5 times 19. 5 times 19 is 95. So minus 95 equals 55. Okay? And so here, we still have a fraction, but look, 10 over 5 is 2. 10 divided by 5 is 2. So this is 2x minus 95 equals 55. And so we got rid of our fraction. We basically multiplied everything by 5. You could see from our original problem, everything got 5 times bigger. This got 5 times bigger, this got 5 times bigger, and this got 5 times bigger. So you can see everything got 5 times bigger. So the problems look bigger, but it's still the same equation. They're both equal. If I do one thing to one side, I have to do it to the other. So that's basically what I'm doing. And now I could solve for x. Plus 95 plus 95. 2x equals 160. 150. And then divide both sides by 2, the coefficient, x equals 75. Okay? So there's our first equation. I'm going through this pretty quickly, but here we go. Let's look at the next one. We're going to multiply the whole equation by the common denominator. So here, let's look at the denominators. Do we see any other denominators besides 3? No. So that is our common denominator. So I'm going to go ahead and write common denominator. Equals 3. So I'm going to multiply both sides by the common denominator, 3. And so what we need to do is we need to take that 3 and we need to distribute it. We need to distribute it. So we end up with 3 over 1 times 4 over 3 equals 12 over 3. And I could reduce that 12 divided by 3. 12 over 3 equals 4. So I'm going to go ahead and write 4x plus, right? So 3 times 4 thirds x is 4x. You can see the work right here. 3 over 1, 3 times 4 over 3, 4 over 3 equals, you multiply across, you get 12. You multiply across, you get 3. And I went ahead and I reduced this to equal 4. 12 divided by 3 is 4. Okay? All right. So we have 4x plus 3 times 8 is 24 equals, and so now I'm going to do 3 times 17. I'm going to use my calculator for that. 3 times 17 is 51. So I have 51 plus 3x. Now I'm going to go ahead and solve. Now that I don't have fractions, this is a lot easier. The numbers are kind of big, but it's okay. I'm going to subtract, get x on one side, right? So minus 3x. I get x plus 24 equals 51. Subtract 24. Got the units on the other. X equals 27. 51 minus 24 is 27. Okay. So what we're doing is we're multiplying both sides by a common denominator. That's going to get rid of the fraction. And so you'll learn about this again. We'll talk about this again in, I think, chapter 7. I can't remember exactly when. But we'll talk about again later in the year. And it's called fraction busters. So we're trying to get rid of these fractions. And so you can see originally we had fractions in our equation. But by multiplying both sides by a common denominator, we get rid of the fraction. And then we can go ahead and solve. Okay? So our next example, this is going to be the first example that we have 2 different fractions. So here we can see that there are 2 different fractions. I'm going to go ahead and highlight the denominators again. And so what number can I have at the bottom? So to find the common denominator, all right, we're going to go ahead and list all the numbers. 6 and 2. And so we're going to list out all the multiples. Multiples are 6, 12, right? 18, 24. So I'm multiplying 6 times 1, 6 times 2, 6 times 1, 6 times 2, 6 times 3, 6 times 4, 6 times 5, 6 times 6. That should be a pretty good list. For 6's, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, and the list goes on. What number do these two have in common? Well, we both have 6's, we both have 12's. So you could use either one. I'm going to use the least common multiple. So do you see how 6 is the least common multiple of the denominators? So I'm going to go ahead and multiply both sides by 6, and that should get rid of a decimal. I mean, of the fraction. So we have 5 over 6 times 6 over 1. 5 over 6 times 6 over 1. We end up with 30 over 6, which equals 5. So 30 over 6 is 5. And then let's go ahead and deal with this first. Oh, sorry. I'm going to do this in red. Go ahead and multiply that. So I get 5x minus 54 equals, I'm going to distribute here, 6 times 1/2 and 6 times -4. So we could say 6 over 1 times 1/2 equals 6 over 2, which equals 3. So this is 3x minus 24. Okay? And now we could solve. Get x on one side. 2x minus 54 equals -24. Add 54 units on the other. 2x equals 24 plus 15. Oh no, 30. I got ahead of myself. 30. 54 minus 20. Negative 24 plus 50 is, 26. 26. Right? Am I doing that right? Negative 24 plus 54. It's 30. Wow. Mr. Han, what are you doing? It's 30. And then divide both sides by 2. X equals 15. Whew. All right. So fractions, we're trying to get rid of the fractions by multiplying by common denominator. The least common multiple of the common denominator. Now here, if we look at example number 4, you can see that it is decimals, not fractions. So we can, the same concept applies here, okay? All we need to know is that when there's one placement over, it is over 10, so that's the tens place, right? And if it's moving over 2 times, it's the hundreds place. Okay, so we need to multiply by either 10 or 100 or 1,000, depending on how many times we want to move the decimal place over. So if we want to move over 1 time, we need to multiply by 10. We'll move over 2 times, we need to multiply by 100. So before we actually get into moving the decimal point over, though, we're going to go ahead and distribute. We're going to go ahead and distribute this. Let's do red like we usually do. We're going to go ahead and distribute this into the terms inside before I go ahead and try to get rid of the decimals. So we'll copy the left side. 1.7x, and we'll get rid of that line. I don't know why it's there. Plus 3.66 or 3.66 equals, so I'm going to use a decimal. I mean, this right here is 0.2x. But I'm going to go ahead and use a calculator here. So 0.2 times 0.45. And I get minus 0.09. 0.09. So I went ahead and distributed, and now that I distributed, I could now focus on how do I get rid of these decimals. And so in order to get rid of these decimals, I'm going to multiply by either 10, 100, or 1,000. So we could see here, we need to move the decimal place over once to get rid of it. So that's either 10. Here's 2 hundreds, tenths, hundreds. So to get rid of the decimals, we're looking at how many times do we have to move the decimal point over. If it's over 2 times, we're going to multiply both sides by 100. If it was 1 time, we're going to do it by 10. But here, we need to move over at least 2 times to get rid of all the decimals. So here, now we're going to move the decimal point over 2 times. That's 170x plus 366. We're going to move that decimal point over 2 times. And then we're going to move this decimal point over 2 times. So that's 20x minus 9. And so that makes our math a lot easier. We don't have any more decimal points. And basically, we're making it 100 times bigger. And so now we're going to get x on one side minus 20x minus 20x. 150x plus 366 equals negative 9 minus 366 minus 366. 150x equals negative 366 minus 9. Oops, minus 9 is negative 375. Divide by 150. X should equal 375. Answer divided by 150 is negative 2.5. So our answer here is negative 2.5. All right, so yes, a little bit more difficult, but this is what we are going to expect from you to be able to get rid of fractions, basically, or decimals. Okay, if you have any questions, make sure you ask. See you soon.